In the vast expanse of the universe, on a desolate, neutral planet, an enormous arena pulsed with life. The Galactic Arena, a structure that stretched far beyond the comprehension of a human eye, was the pinnacle of interstellar entertainment. Here, warriors from countless worlds gathered to prove their strength and courage, competing in the intergalactic combat games. The arena was the ultimate proving ground, a sacred space where the greatest fighters tested their mettle in battles watched by billions. This year, the games were more grandiose than ever. Spectators from across the galaxy, some with multiple eyes, others with scales, tentacles, and armor-like skin, filled every seat, all craning for a view of the coming contests. The roar of alien voices reverberated through the arena, creating a steady hum of excitement. It was a festival of combat, where each species took immense pride in its champions, who embodied their strengths, their traditions, and their pride. But amidst this swirl of fierce competitors, one species was notably absent from the galaxy's roster of warriors: humanity. Humans had participated before, but only to the audience's amusement. Short-lived, physically fragile, and often lacking in remarkable physical traits, they were the laughingstock of the games. They lacked the imposing stature of the Skarn, the lightning-fast reflexes of the Zalari, or the psychic abilities of the Mark AR. To the galactic audience, humanity was seen as quaint and backward, little more than a passing curiosity in the vast tapestry of advanced species. In fact, for the past several tournaments, human participants had only provided comic relief. Each time one stepped into the ring, the arena filled with mocking laughter. The performances were as predictable as they were disappointing, humans faltering, struggling, then quickly falling in defeat to much larger, stronger, or faster opponents. The audience delighted in these matches, but not for the reasons one might expect. They cheered not for the human warriors, but for the spectacle of their swift defeat, as if humans were entering the ring to offer little more than comic relief. There was little to no respect for Earth's representatives. And as word spread that another human fighter would join this year's games, the audience's derision only grew. The betting pools treated him as nothing more than a foregone conclusion, an easy win for his opponent. But unlike those who had come before him, Jonah Kane didn't enter with a fanfare. He was different from the trained soldiers Earth had sent in the past. Jonah was a botanist, a wiry, calm figure who had spent years studying plant life on a distant, hostile world. Stranded for 5 long years after a research mission had gone wrong, he had been forced to survive with nothing but his intellect and wits. He wasn't here because he wanted to fight. He was here because he knew how to survive. As Jonah stepped into the ring, he did so with none of the bravado the crowd was used to seeing. There was no flashy armor, no heavy weaponry, just a lean, quiet man in a simple combat suit, eyes scanning his surroundings, absorbing every detail. The jeers from the crowd were relentless. He looked out of place, smaller, almost fragile compared to the hulking, heavily armed alien warriors who had fought before him. The jeers grew louder as Jonah's opponent was announced, a Skarn gladiator named Virak, a towering giant with thick, armored scales, claws the size of Jonah's head, and a reputation for tearing his opponents apart in mere moments. As Virak entered the ring, the crowd erupted in excitement. The Skarn gladiator was a crowd favorite, known for his brutal efficiency. This would be no contest, they thought, a quick and entertaining victory, just like always. But Jonah's eyes remained focused, unwavering, studying his opponent's every move. He didn't adopt a battle stance. He didn't raise his fists. Instead, he simply waited, calm and unshaken. To the audience, his stillness seemed like the confusion of a man who knew he was outmatched. They couldn't see the careful calculations happening behind his gaze, the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years surviving against impossible odds. When the gong sounded, Virak charged forward, his heavy steps shaking the ground, his claws raised to strike. Jonah didn't react as expected. He didn't run or try to block the blow. Instead, he sidestepped with a precision that seemed effortless, watching as Virak's claws slashed the air where he had just been standing. Jonah moved with the grace and speed of someone who had long ago learned that survival didn't require brute strength, it required anticipation, adaptation, and precision. The crowd's laughter faltered, then faded into murmurs of confusion. They had expected an easy takedown, but instead, they saw Jonah Kane dodging and weaving, each movement calculated to stay just out of reach of Virak's lethal blows. Jonah didn't waste his energy trying to match Virak's power. He conserved every movement, conserving his strength and waiting for openings that no one else could see. As the fight continued, Jonah's strategy became clear. Every time Virak attacked, Jonah would step aside, letting the Skarn's own momentum work against him. He delivered quick, surgical strikes, not enough to harm, but enough to frustrate, to tire, to wear Virak down. Minutes ticked by, and the mighty Skarn warrior's movements began to slow, his breaths coming in heavy pants. Jonah, meanwhile, remained steady, barely breaking a sweat, his eyes fixed on his opponent with a focus that bordered on unnerving. In one decisive moment, Virak lunged forward with all his remaining strength, hoping to end the fight with a final blow. But Jonah anticipated the move, sidestepping and delivering a precise, powerful strike to a sensitive joint in Virak's armor. The Skarn warrior collapsed to his knees, dazed, unable to rise. The crowd was silent, stunned into disbelief. In mere minutes, Jonah Kane, the unassuming human botanist, had defeated one of the arena's fiercest warriors without brute force, without weapons, simply by using his intellect and his survival-honed instincts. He had done what no one had expected, and the impact was undeniable. Jonah Kane's victory over Virak rippled through the galaxy. Word of his unexpected triumph spread from system to system, captivating audiences who had previously dismissed humans as little more than weak, passing entertainment. But there he stood, a man who had never held a weapon, whose survival instincts were forged in solitude on a hostile planet, now beating a seasoned warrior in the galactic arena. It was a mystery to everyone how he'd done it, and curiosity grew. Who was this man, and how had he defeated an opponent like Virak? Jonah didn't come with a background in military tactics, no rigorous combat training, no elaborate techniques honed in academies or battlefields. His background was ordinary, almost laughably so. He had trained as a botanist, working with plants and ecosystems, studying how life adapted to the most extreme conditions. He had a natural scientist's patience and a survivor's resilience, traits that few saw as strengths in combat. And yet, in the arena, these skills translated into something more. Years of isolation on an alien world had transformed him. Stranded with limited resources and no contact with Earth, Jonah's focus had been on survival, and survival required acute observation, an understanding of weaknesses, and an economy of movement and effort. Each decision he made on that harsh, distant planet had been one of necessity, each one sharpening his instincts and his intuition. He hadn't trained to be a warrior. He'd been forced to evolve into something that could endure where others would perish. The crowd that filled the galactic arena hadn't understood any of this, until now. When the next match was announced, the arena filled once again with an audience eager to see if this human could survive a second time. This time, his opponent was Nerix, a Zalari warrior with unmatched speed. Zalari warriors were known for their agility, their fast reflexes, their fluid movements that left most opponents dizzy and disoriented. Nerix himself had fought in dozens of matches and had never been defeated by any creature slower than his own kind. The crowd was eager, waiting to see how the slow, fragile human could possibly keep up. Jonah's quiet, focused demeanor contrasted sharply with the explosive energy of Nerix, who darted back and forth, a blur of movement and momentum. As the gong sounded, Nerix closed the distance between them in an instant, aiming for a strike that should have ended the match in seconds. But Jonah, ever observant, didn't waste energy trying to match his speed. Instead, he moved with subtle, calculated precision, his focus sharpened by years of having to react to the unexpected on an alien planet. Nerix, confident in his speed, tried every maneuver, every feint, every angle of attack. And each time, Jonah evaded, pivoted, and sidestepped, always staying just out of reach. To the crowd, it looked like he was barely moving, yet he seemed to anticipate each of Nerix's moves with uncanny timing, as if seeing them a split second before they happened. His responses weren't reflexive but deeply calculated, exploiting Nerix's overconfident reliance on speed. As the fight wore on, the Zalari warrior began to tire, his movements slowing ever so slightly, his breathing growing more labored. Jonah, in contrast, remained as calm and composed as when he'd started, conserving his energy and waiting for an opening. Nerix's frustration grew with each failed attempt, his movements becoming more reckless as he tried to force a victory. At last, Jonah saw his chance. With Nerix lunging in desperation, Jonah timed his response perfectly, sidestepping and delivering a swift, precise blow that disrupted the Zalari's balance, sending him sprawling. It wasn't a powerful hit, but it was exactly what was needed. Nerix hit the ground, stunned and vulnerable, and before he could recover, the match was over. Jonah had done it again. The audience, once again, sat in silence. They had come expecting an easy victory for the Zalari warrior, only to watch this human's slow, steady movements dismantle one of the galaxy's fastest fighters. Jonah's victories weren't about strength or speed, they were about adaptability, about finding openings where none seemed to exist. For the first time, the crowd wasn't laughing at the human. They were transfixed, beginning to understand that there was more to this quiet fighter than met the eye. News of Jonah's second victory spread quickly, and his reputation grew. Humanity, once mocked and dismissed, suddenly had a representative who defied the expectations of every species in the galaxy. His style was a mystery, his background an enigma, and his determination evident to all who watched. Warriors from other species began to take notice, questioning what they had always assumed about humans. If Jonah Kane was an example, perhaps there was more to humanity than they'd realized. With each fight, Jonah's legend grew, and so did the challenges before him. His next opponent was a Mark-AR psychic, a being whose mind was his most potent weapon. Mark-AR were known for their telepathic abilities, able to predict movements, anticipate attacks, and disrupt the mental focus of their opponents. Against such a foe, Jonah would have no place to hide, no way to rely on his calculated movements alone. But the Mark-AR quickly learned that Jonah's mind was as resilient as his body. Years of isolation had taught him to rely on his instincts, to react without overthinking, to trust the deep-rooted instincts that had kept him alive when logic alone would have failed. When the Mark-AR attempted to infiltrate Jonah's mind, he found only calm, a quiet mind focused on the present. Jonah's thoughts weren't frantic, weren't easy to read, they were like still water, unfathomable and steady. The psychic attacks had no effect. Jonah's responses were fluid, unburdened by hesitation or doubt, his actions instinctual, grounded in his survivalist mentality. The Mark-AR, struggling to understand this unbreakable mental calm, faltered. In the end, Jonah's patience paid off. The Mark-AR, unable to predict or control Jonah's moves, fell to a carefully timed strike that ended the match. With each victory, the shift in the audience's perception became more palpable. Jonah Kane wasn't winning through sheer power or superhuman speed but through something less tangible: resilience, intuition, and a quiet, unshakable focus. The galaxy, once so eager to mock humanity, was now captivated by the story of this one man. Each fight, each triumph, made it harder to dismiss the species he represented. Jonah Kane's victories weren't just wins for him, they were victories for humanity. For the first time, the galaxy saw humans as more than weak and insignificant. Jonah's reputation continued to grow, and with it came new challenges and new enemies. Word of his improbable victories spread across the galaxy, captivating audiences and competitors alike. To the public, he was an anomaly, a human who had somehow managed to defeat some of the arena's most formidable fighters without the advantages of strength, speed, or psychic power. But for others, Jonah Kane was a problem that needed solving. As Jonah prepared for his next match, whispers circulated among the competitors and officials of the arena. Rivals were growing restless, uncomfortable with the idea of a human appending the traditional hierarchy of combat prowess. He defied their expectations once, then again and again, and with each victory, humanity's reputation was shifting from laughable to dangerous. It was a change that didn't sit well with everyone. The next opponent selected for Jonah was the Dracori champion, Rask, a fighter known not only for his immense size and strength but for his armor, a metallic, nearly impenetrable exoskeleton that could withstand direct energy blasts. Rask was a creature built for war, bred and trained in a culture where every citizen served as both worker and warrior. He was ruthless and relentless, the embodiment of physical power. The arena buzzed with anticipation, for this fight seemed different. Jonah's previous opponents had been strong, fast, or skilled, but Rask was a tank. No one could imagine how a mere human could stand against such overwhelming physical force, and the mood of the crowd reflected this tension. This wasn't a fight they expected Jonah to win. This was the test they believed would finally expose the limitations of humanity. As the match began, Jonah took his usual calm approach, observing, assessing, waiting for Rask to make the first move. And Rask did, charging forward with a deafening roar, his metal-plated arms swinging down with a force that could shatter stone. Jonah sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the impact, but he could feel the reverberations of Rask's blows as they struck the ground, a clear reminder of the power he was up against. Rask wasted no time, pursuing Jonah with a ferocity that left little room for retreat. Each attack was a calculated attempt to corner him, to trap him in a position where there would be no escape. Jonah's usual tactic of dodging and waiting for his opponent to tire seemed useless here. Rask was tireless, his armored body protecting him from the kind of quick, precise strikes Jonah had used to bring down others. But Jonah's mind was calm, searching for an answer. His years of isolation had taught him that even the strongest predator could be defeated if its weaknesses were understood. He began to study Rask's movements, noting the slight delays when the Dracori swung his heavy arms, the ever-so-small gaps in his armor's plating where the joints met. It was dangerous work. Jonah's usual strategy of maintaining distance became a deadly game of proximity, requiring him to stay close enough to observe these details while constantly moving to avoid Rask's crushing attacks. Each close call left him with a deeper understanding of his opponent, until finally, he saw an opening. Rask's armor, while nearly impervious, restricted his movements in certain ways. There was a slight delay each time he lifted his arms to strike, a split second that left the joints vulnerable. With his path clear, Jonah switched tactics. He began to feint, deliberately baiting Rask into heavy, overcommit attacks. As expected, Rask took the bait, his massive limbs swinging with brutal force, but each time, Jonah was just beyond reach, guiding the Dracori into a rhythm of attack and recovery. And then, with a single calculated strike, Jonah lunged, aiming for the joint where Rask's arm met his shoulder plate. His blow landed with precision, and though it didn't pierce the armor, it struck hard enough to disrupt the mechanism. Rask roared in frustration as his arm stalled mid-swing, briefly immobilized. Jonah seized the opportunity, delivering another quick strike to a joint on Rask's leg. The Dracori stumbled, his movements momentarily hindered by Jonah's targeted attacks. The crowd watched in stunned silence, realizing that the human was doing the impossible again, exposing the weaknesses in a creature that had seemed indestructible. But Rask wasn't defeated yet. With a roar, he tore free of his own armor, sacrificing protection for the freedom of movement he needed to end this fight. What he lacked in armor, he now made up for in speed and aggression, and the crowd leaned in, sensing a final confrontation. Yet Jonah remained unfazed. He'd anticipated this shift, watching for the moment when desperation would push Rask to abandon his defenses. Without his armor, Rask's movements were faster but more reckless, his exposed skin now vulnerable to Jonah's strikes. Jonah adapted, focusing on agility over power, landing blows in quick succession that gradually wore down his opponent. He moved like water, flowing around each attack, wearing down Rask in a way that was as much mental as physical. Finally, Rask's stamina began to falter. The Dracori's breaths grew heavy, his movements sluggish, each swing of his arms slower than the last. Jonah saw his moment. In one last, fluid motion, he darted past Rask's defenses and struck him at the base of the neck, a targeted blow that left the Dracori staggered, unable to continue. The crowd erupted, but it wasn't the triumphant cheer that had followed other fighters' victories. It was an astonished, uncertain roar, a collective realization that Jonah Kane, the unremarkable human, had done it again. He had defeated an opponent thought unbeatable by using nothing more than his own intellect, adaptability, and patience. He had survived what should have been an impossible challenge, and in doing so, he had once again forced the galaxy to question everything they thought they knew about humanity. As Jonah left the ring, whispers spread like wildfire. Warriors from other species exchanged uneasy glances, some impressed, others visibly disturbed. Humanity's reputation was no longer a joke. It was becoming something to be reckoned with. Jonah Kane had become a legend in the making, a symbol of resilience and adaptability that the galaxy had not anticipated. With each fight, he was proving that strength wasn't just about power or advanced technology. It was about understanding, endurance, and the will to survive against all odds. In the eyes of the galaxy, humanity had risen from the status of a minor curiosity to a species worthy of attention and, perhaps, respect. With each victory, Jonah Kane's reputation grew, not only among spectators but among competitors who had once dismissed him. It wasn't just about defeating opponents, it was the way he did it. Each time he entered the ring, he adapted, outthinking enemies who had trained for years in specific combat styles, all while maintaining his unbreakable calm. Soon, word spread that Jonah would be facing opponents who weren't just powerful, but willing to do anything to make sure he lost, bringing a new set of obstacles to overcome. One by one, challengers approached him before the matches, offering bribes for him to throw the fight. Alien currencies, exotic technology, promises of luxuries beyond anything Earth could offer, all laid out as attempts to sway him. Jonah's rejections were swift and final. He wasn't here for wealth or glory. His mind was set on something beyond the material, a drive that none of his rivals could fully understand. When bribery didn't work, some turned to intimidation. Whispers reached Jonah of ambushes being planned, but he never wavered. Each time he walked into the ring, he knew he was facing more than just his opponent. His victories were not only winning over the crowd but exposing the vulnerabilities of champions who had once seemed untouchable, and that shift threatened long-standing power dynamics among the galaxy's top species. Jonah's next match was against Illyrex, a Sirith known for her manipulation of plasma energy, which allowed her to create lethal waves of heat and light from her very skin. With her iridescent skin radiating with barely contained energy, Illyrex was more than just a warrior. She was a living weapon, one that had never lost a match. The audience was confident that Jonah had finally met his match. Plasma energy was unpredictable, lethal at close range, and impossible to dodge for long. Jonah would have no choice but to engage her head-on, and in that, the galaxy believed, he would finally fall. The match began, and immediately Illyrex unleashed a wave of plasma that seared across the ring, leaving charred marks in its path. Jonah darted aside, narrowly evading the blast, but Illyrex's attacks were relentless, each one more intense than the last. She maneuvered him around the ring, forcing him to keep moving, trying to wear him down. But Jonah didn't rush. Instead of charging, he studied her movements, observing the brief moments between each surge when Illyrex needed to recalibrate her energy. She was powerful, but her strength came with limits. Jonah noticed that each plasma burst was followed by a split second of stillness as she recharged. He began timing his movements, staying just out of range, conserving his own energy while letting her exhaust herself. Illyrex's frustration grew as her attacks failed to land. She increased the intensity of each burst, attempting to corner him with her blinding energy. The crowd gasped as Jonah narrowly avoided one blast after another, appearing to survive by the smallest of margins. But each dodge was calculated, each step a result of observing her patterns. Gradually, Illyrex's movements slowed, her breathing becoming heavy, her skin's glow dimming as she began to reach her energy limits. Jonah saw his opportunity. In a single fluid motion, he closed the distance, moving faster than anyone had expected, and struck in a precise spot that disrupted her concentration. Illyrex staggered, losing control over her plasma manipulation. Jonah seized the moment, delivering a series of quick, strategic blows that left her incapacitated, her energy reserves depleted. For the fourth time, Jonah Kane had defeated an opponent deemed unbeatable, not by overpowering them but by exploiting their vulnerabilities. The crowd's reaction was no longer disbelief or shock but an uneasy respect. He was no longer seen as an outlier, a fluke. He had earned a reputation as a true competitor. Whispers began among the Galactic spectators. Maybe humans weren't as weak as they had always assumed. Perhaps their strength lay not in raw power but in something less obvious, something harder to define. Yet, Jonah's victories continued to rattle the arena's established powers. There were those who profited from the predictable dominance of traditional champions, and Jonah's relentless wins were starting to disrupt that balance. When bribes and intimidation had failed, certain factions began working behind the scenes, setting up obstacles in the hope that Jonah would finally falter. His training spaces were tampered with, equipment malfunctioned at crucial moments, even his food supply was subtly altered to weaken him before matches. Jonah, though, was no stranger to hardship. The years he'd spent surviving on a hostile planet had taught him to anticipate danger from unexpected sources, and he adapted quickly, remaining vigilant in the face of these subtle threats. He grew more cautious, more observant, but his resolve only hardened. If anything, these underhanded tactics only deepened his drive to keep fighting, to prove that his victories were earned, not given. The next opponent he faced was widely considered a last-ditch effort to end his streak. Xyrok was a towering Sithraxian, a being with a mechanical exoskeleton that enhanced his natural strength and speed to terrifying levels. He was the arena's enforcer, a fighter known for his ruthlessness and lack of mercy. Xyrok's exoskeleton was designed not only for combat but to instill fear. His towering frame gleamed with reinforced armor and weapons systems that activated with each step, each weapon tailored to counter the strengths of every known species. As the match began, Xyrok moved with a calculated aggression, each step a reminder of the raw power that pulsed beneath his armored exterior. Jonah was faced with an opponent who could withstand his usual tactics, whose reinforced armor left little room for Jonah to find a weakness. But even now, Jonah's calm never faltered. He studied Xyrok's movements, observing the mechanics of his armor, the way his joints locked and unlocked as he moved. Xyrok's attacks were relentless, but Jonah kept his distance, waiting, watching for any sign of a flaw. It took time, but eventually, Jonah noticed that certain movements caused slight delays in Xyrok's responses, microseconds of hesitation where the armor's functions couldn't keep up with the speed of its own wearer. It was a small flaw, nearly imperceptible, but Jonah had spent years learning to survive on details just like this. In a final, risky move, Jonah baited Xyrok into a powerful swing, and just as Xyrok committed, Jonah sidestepped and targeted the joint in the armor's knee. His strike was swift and precise, and while it didn't destroy the armor, it was enough to jam the mechanism, causing Xyrok to stumble. That stumble was all Jonah needed. He launched into a series of rapid strikes, each one aimed at weak points he had carefully observed, gradually wearing down his opponent's defenses. The match ended with Xyrok immobilized, his armor rendered useless by a human who had, yet again, exposed the hidden weaknesses in even the most advanced technology. The crowd erupted, but this time, there was no hint of mockery. Jonah had proven himself beyond doubt, and his victory marked a turning point for humanity's image in the galaxy. He had become a symbol of resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity, a living testament to the fact that sometimes, it's not the strongest who win, but those who are willing to adapt, to learn, and to face even the most overwhelming odds with unwavering determination. Jonah Kane's victories had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, transforming him from an oddity into a legend. Each match had become a test of his endurance, adaptability, and intellect. By now, there was no denying the impact he had made, not only on his competitors but on the galactic arena itself. His success had reshaped the perception of humanity across the stars, challenging old stereotypes and creating a legacy that was, in itself, a quiet rebellion against the status quo. The Galactic Arena's governing council took note of this shift. They had never anticipated a human becoming a figure of respect among species that had long considered themselves superior. This threatened the foundation of the games, a tradition built on showcasing the strengths of physically advanced species. Jonah had become a disruption, a reminder that power could come from unexpected places. And so, to restore balance, they set him against the champion of champions, a fighter so powerful and revered that no one had ever lasted more than a few moments in combat with him. That final opponent was Threx, a warrior who seemed more myth than reality. A master of both physical combat and mental manipulation, Threx had trained for decades in isolation, honing every skill to perfection. Threx's abilities went beyond raw power or speed. He had an unparalleled mastery over his own body and mind, a level of control that allowed him to anticipate and counter attacks before they fully formed. His species, the Xyloxians, were known for their superior intellect and agility, and Threx was the greatest among them. As the final match approached, speculation ran wild. Fans and fighters alike debated whether Jonah, the human who had turned the arena upside down, could possibly stand against a creature like Threx. The odds were higher than ever, the stakes immense, and for many, it was assumed this would be the end of Jonah's extraordinary run. Jonah entered the ring as calm as ever, his focus unbreakable, his eyes scanning Threx with the same patience he had used to study all his previous opponents. Threx, in contrast, moved with an effortless precision, every step as fluid as if he were gliding. It was clear he was a master of his craft, a fighter who had never known defeat. The match began, and Threx wasted no time. His strikes came fast, precise, each one aimed to exploit any possible vulnerability. Jonah dodged, sidestepped, narrowly avoiding each attack, but Threx's movements were relentless. He didn't tire, didn't pause, didn't give Jonah a moment to gather his bearings. The Xyloxian's blows were calculated, with each strike pushing Jonah further into a defensive position, testing his limits. For the first time, Jonah felt himself struggling to keep up. Threx was not only faster but also incredibly adaptive, his strategy evolving mid-fight in response to Jonah's moves. It was as if Threx were reading his mind, anticipating every dodge, every counter-strike. But Jonah didn't panic. He had faced impossible odds before, and he knew that the key to survival wasn't brute force but endurance. He focused on staying grounded, moving in small, controlled bursts, conserving his energy as Threx continued to press forward. Minutes passed, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as Jonah absorbed blow after blow, each narrowly missing him by a fraction. Threx's attacks were growing faster, more aggressive, as he tried to break Jonah's defenses. But despite the pressure, Jonah held his ground, refusing to fall into the trap of desperation. He knew Threx was testing him, looking for any sign of weakness, but he was determined to give none. Then Jonah noticed something. As flawless as Threx's techniques were, there was a pattern, subtle, almost invisible, but there. Each time Threx executed a particular combination of strikes, his left side remained unguarded for a split second. It was a risk, but it was the only opening Jonah had seen so far. He bided his time, enduring the barrage of attacks, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, when Threx launched into the familiar sequence, Jonah acted. With all his strength, he dodged to the side, using the small opening to land a single, precise blow to Threx's unguarded flank. It wasn't enough to injure, but it disrupted Threx's rhythm, forcing him back for the first time in the match. The crowd gasped as Threx staggered, surprised by the human's counterattack. But Threx quickly recovered, his eyes narrowing as he refocused on Jonah. Now aware that his strategy had been seen through, Threx shifted his approach, moving faster, his attacks less predictable. Jonah found himself facing a new onslaught, one that seemed designed to overwhelm him completely. Yet Jonah refused to back down. He had come too far, fought too hard to let this be his undoing. He braced himself, returning to his strategy of waiting, observing, trusting in his ability to endure. Every movement was precise, conserving energy, evading with minimal effort, letting Threx tire himself out. Little by little, the signs of fatigue appeared, barely perceptible but there, a slight delay in Threx's reactions, a small hesitation between movements. Jonah seized on this, beginning to strike back, each blow aimed not at overpowering Threx but at destabilizing him. He attacked in small, precise bursts, targeting weak points, keeping Threx off balance. The Xyloxian fought back with fierce determination, but Jonah's resilience began to wear him down. As the match wore on, it became clear that Jonah was not just holding his own, he was winning, not through force but by outlasting threats, turning the champion's own power against him. The crowd, once doubtful, now watched in awe, recognizing the sheer mental and physical endurance it took to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep adapting. In a final, decisive moment, Jonah delivered one last blow that sent Threx stumbling. The Xyloxian dropped to one knee, exhausted, unable to continue. The match was over. Jonah Kane, the unassuming human, had defeated the galaxy's greatest champion. The silence in the arena was deafening, a stunned acknowledgement of what they had just witnessed. Jonah had done what no one believed possible. He had turned a species once mocked into a symbol of resilience and determination, a force that could not be underestimated. And as he stood there, victorious, he knew that he had done more than just win a fight. He had changed the way the galaxy saw humanity, proving that strength wasn't just about power, it was about heart, about the will to survive, and the courage to face even the greatest odds without fear. As he left the ring, Jonah Kane's legacy was set. He was no longer just a survivor, he was a warrior, a legend, a symbol of everything humanity could be. And though he was just one man, he had lifted his entire species to a place of respect and honor in the galaxy, a place they would hold for generations to come.